Welcome to the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. I'm your host, Raphael Rosengarten, CEO and co-founder of Genialis, the RNA biomarker company. On this podcast, we discuss the future of healthcare and health technology, and how advances in data and data science are fueling the next industrial revolution. If you have not already, please subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information on Genialis and our unique approach to AI-driven precision medicine, please visit our website at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com. Now, on to the show. This episode features two guests, Jennifer Goldsack and Yashoda Sharma of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of healthcare disparities in terms of access and outcomes, and how digital solutions are a big part of the overall solution. I hope you find this subject and my guests as fascinating as I do. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is my absolute pleasure to have two wonderful guests today, Jennifer Goldsack and Yashoda Sharma, who are representing the Digital Medicine Society, DIME. But I'm going to let them do a better job of introducing the organization than I possibly could. So, Jen, why don't you get us started and tell us what DIME's all about and how you came to be involved in it?
So I'm very proud to say that I'm the funder of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. And our mission, and we are a very mission-driven organization, is to advance the ethical, effective, equitable, and safe use of digital technologies to redefine healthcare and improve lives. This is a mission we're really proud of. And I do think it's really important to clarify that we are not tech determinists. We are tech enthusiasts. And so what does that mean in practice? That means that we're not here trying to shoehorn digital technologies into every nook and cranny of healthcare. And then we're going to sit here and say, gosh, we've been successful. But rather what we think about is, what are some of the most pressing and persistent challenges in healthcare that we have simply been unable to address despite decades of trying? And how can we use these new digital tools in the toolbox to try and make forward progress? So that's our purpose, that's our mission. And mechanism of action, if you like, is to really support those innovators, those entities, those care providers, and in some cases, even our regulatory colleagues in advancing the field. So when we think about the digitization of healthcare, we feel strongly that there's enormous ROI associated with it, whether that's commercial return to folks investing, whether that return is improved outcomes for the patients our industry exists to care for, whether that is improved access, improved equity. We believe all of that is possible through the digitization of healthcare, but the activation energy is so high. There's an enormous barrier to overcome for any organization trying to go alone. And so what we do at DIME is bring together the leading innovators in the space to sit at the table and say, how do we actually make it feasible for organizations ranging from startups all the way through to large multi-billion-dollar organizations and even the federal government to drive forward? And that's really who we are at our essence.
That sounds like a very big mission, and I appreciate that sort of each facet of that's probably important in its own work. Yashoda, maybe you can speak a little bit about your involvement and where your area of focus is within that mission.
Yes. So hi, everyone. Yashoda Sharma. I am a program director here at the Digital Medicine Society. I've been here a little bit over 2 years. My background is a little bit different. I started off in academic research, specifically in genetics research, managing large genetics and genomic projects. Most recently, I served as a principal investigator for the All of Us research program at a federally qualified health center. And the work we started doing there on the digital divide is what connected me to DIME, and just really passionate about the work that's being done at the Digital Medicine Society and seeing the impact that we can have on transforming healthcare for everyone is what brought me here. My work here has been primarily focused on two projects where we created resources to address the digital divide, to really help with making digital medicine a little bit more equitable and inclusive. And currently my work is focused on building up DIME's health equity portfolio.
Just for the sake of our listeners who maybe are a little bit less familiar with this space, there are sort of two terms I'd like to try to define at the outset. One is help us understand what the phrase digital medicine encompasses, because that feels kind of new, or at least it's something for this age and not a previous age. And the second thing I'd like to define is, what is the digital divide? What do you mean by that?
I'll take the digital divide and give Jen digital medicine. So digital divide, there's two elements to it. There's access and literacy. And so when we talk about digital access, we're talking about access to the internet, to broadband, to Wi-Fi, and we're also talking about access to devices. We know that a majority of the US have smartphones, but not many people have computers, laptops, desktops, or tablets. And in the digital era, we know those are very important for accessing services as well. And then the second part of it is literacy. So being able to connect to the internet, being able to use Bluetooth connection, being able to know how to stay safe when you're using digital devices or being safe on the internet, that falls under that literacy component as well. And so we know in order to really advance digital medicine, we need to do a lot more work with ensuring that the digital divide is not holding people back.
So it's really interesting that you sort of ask, what are digital medicines? And, while they exist, there's a nice definition for digital therapeutics. That's a very small field. There are about, I'm going to probably get this number wrong, but the last number that I am sure of is there are 23 cleared digital therapeutics in the US. And, while they will be important as part of the patchwork of digital solutions that we are relying on as we digitize, healthcare, the last big industry to go through digitization, when at Dime we describe digital medicine, we are talking about the practice of medicine supported by digital tools, technologies, and techniques. We aren't talking about replacing clinical care providers or this notion of caring for people with technology, but rather we are thinking about the many, many ways that different digital technologies, whether that's a communication technology, whether that's a clinical decision support system, whether that is a monitoring tool, whether that is indeed a digital therapeutic, whether that is the sort of administrative tool that can help make accessing healthcare and delivery of healthcare more efficient. And then we've got to look at how challenging access to healthcare is today in the undigitized environment. Despite being in the midst of a mental health care crisis, 1 in 2 counties in the United States don't offer a single mental health specialist. Despite, what we're seeing is increasing rates of death from heart failure, a reversal of what was a very positive trend. 1 in 2 Black Americans live in a county without a cardiologist. This is not a viable way to care for people. We need to rely on technologies to, 1, overcome the maldistribution of clinical experts and the patients who need them most. 2, to make accessing care less burdensome so that you don't have to take time off work, pay for transport, pay for childcare, pay for elder care, or whatever that looks like in order to access your healthcare. And 3, we need to do absolutely everything possible to make sure that we aren't sitting in the clinic waiting for people to present sick and perhaps further down a sort of medical journey that they need to be, such that it reduces the likelihood of a good outcome and makes their care more expensive. We need to use the digitization to move away from our sick care system, meet people where they are, and really try and move towards a healthcare system.
I love this distinction between healthcare and sick care, and I think it really is important to understand when thinking about the solution space. The other thing I want to ask you about is Dime stakeholder engagement. So one of the things so impressive to me from the outside is just looking at the diversity of stakeholders who participate, who have a real concern in these various issues, but also given the way that Dime is set up around discrete projects and initiatives, those are going to be sort of revolving sets of stakeholders. So how does Dime manage stakeholder engagement and maybe more importantly, alignment of interests and expertise? And for that matter, kind of who constitutes Dime's membership? How does the hub come together?
Such a great question. And I'm going to take it in 2 parts. And I'm going to start by, why is multi-stakeholder engagement even important? From the very beginning of Dime, when we established ourselves, we realized that digital health, or the digitization of healthcare, is likely the most interdisciplinary endeavor that in the industrial age, or now the digital age, we've ever faced. At the table, you need patients and citizen scientists, you need cybersecurity experts, you need physicists, electrical engineers, you need sort of product specialists, you need developers, you need data scientists, clinical care providers, healthcare executives, payers, regulators, investors, funders, unless we are all standing shoulder to shoulder, that we agree upon what the North Star is, what we're even trying to do here, unless we are speaking a unifying common language, we have a lingua franca, unless we can actually rally around and identify who's on first for certain tasks as we digitize this field, we will not be successful. And given where we are and our challenges caring for people, our challenges around equity and outcomes and affordability for individuals and society, we have to get this right. So from the very beginning at Dime, we've said we need to make sure that all of these voices are at the table. And it's particularly important when you think about something like cybersecurity, because frankly, that's been commoditized in other industries. This should never be a barrier, but that means that we have to have the discipline to welcome new experts and to support them in becoming familiar with our complex environment. So that's sort of been a tenet at Dime from the start. The other piece is, and I'm incredibly proud of our team here at Dime, is I think, and in fact, I would go so far as to say I feel strongly that we try hard every day to show up with a lot of humility. We don't build medical products, and we don't treat patients, and we don't conduct clinical trials of new therapies. Rather, we are the trusted partner by industry that if there is a challenge around improving lives using digital techniques, whether it's substantial investment has been made and there hasn't been forward progress, or there's an opportunity that is yet to be captured, industry across all stakeholder groups will come to us and share that need with us. Where we see that there is a groundswell of activity, demand, appetite, we rely not only on the different stakeholder groups to trust us by briefing us on what the issues are, but to sort of sit at the table with us and co-create solutions. And then the final part of that is, we then rely upon the community, our partners, to actually go out and implement these best practices, these frameworks, to align incentives as we may recommend, to take new skills that they may have learned through our Digital Medicine Academy to actually improve the way we care for people. And so our community is absolutely the lifeblood of everything we do. And it's because of them that we've been able to be so successful. We are very, very proud that we are trusted by leaders in the field. And currently, Raphael, I think we're working with over 350 different organizations right now across our portfolio. And that doesn't even contemplate the tens of thousands of individuals who have been through our Digital Medicine Academy.
So 2 of our primary projects that focus on health equity reflect the multi-stakeholder engagement and the communities that we build perfectly. The first one is our project, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Digitized Clinical Trials. For this project, we engage patient advocacy groups, we engage patient engagement groups, decentralized clinical trials, clinical researchers, life sciences, clinical sponsors. As Jen mentioned, with the community, getting a representation of the community who are involved in clinical trials and getting their input, vetting the resources, with developing the resources. And the idea is that we have all the voices around the table. We can learn from each other's pain points. We get the different perspectives. We get their pain points. We learn from their successes as well as their failures. And then we can create a product, a resource that is representative of the work they are needing to do, and that can then be impactful and successful for their work while taking into account all of the people who can benefit from those resources. And then a second project is with our digital health measurement collaborative community. And so for that project, we developed 2 toolkits for inclusive product development and then product deployment. And one of the strengths of Dime is really having the right people at the table. And for this project, we have representatives from FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And they helped us build this collaborative community as a priority for CDRH in advancing health equity, but also getting these multi-stakeholder input with developing products and deploying them. And through that collaboration, we were able to develop these 2 toolkits that address being more inclusive and provides resources to be more inclusive throughout the product development life cycle. So again, this is just an example of how we have all the different voices that need to be at the table so that we have buy-in from the start, so that the resources we're creating are actually going to be impactful and we're not just putting them out in the world. And that's been the real power of our multi-stakeholder engagement, because at the end of the day, we know one entity or one organization cannot solve the healthcare problems or even the health equity problems alone. We really need to have all these voices acting together.
It seems to me like there's a kind of an interesting balance you have to strike between sort of how Jen described, bringing all the stakeholders together, building the sort of implementation model, and then Dime can kind of make sure that it's carried forward or put into practice as sort of an orchestrator or a conductor, versus building toolkits where you're essentially teaching the community to fish, right? Where you're building out more capabilities in the community at large. Do you see these as intention, or are these just two sides of a coin that you're able to kind of optimize?
I think that we think about our pre-competitive research, so our sort of multi-stakeholder collaborations, as being essential to defining what good looks like and what good looks like in terms of real talk, right? Not some kind of reflection on what best practice looks like with no real consideration or contemplation of some of the struggles that community healthcare providers actually face, or some of the difficulties in actually integrating some of these tools into routine clinical care or into clinical research. So with like a very practical and tactical lens, how do we actually move this forward? How do we define those things so that there is confidence to push forward? And then very separately, we actually have our Digital Medicine Academy, which is addressing the skills gap that's out there. So we do have a separate education arm that is thinking about how do we support individuals who are working in the field today, who are needing to keep pace with all of this innovation. So through our Digital Medicine Academy, we have courses on ethical digital medicine, right? How do you actually come to this? How do you think about asking good questions in every staff meeting you're in, to make sure that we don't make a mistake that inadvertently hurts people, either through the development of tools that harm or exclude, or through the subpar implementation that either alienates sort of clinical care providers or hurts patients, or causes sort of additional disparities. These are the sorts of things we do. And so it's very much two sides of the same coin, and very intentional indeed.
Just as our guests, Jennifer Goldsack and Yashoda Sharma, have emphasized, advancing health equity and making digital medicine accessible and effective for everyone are critical goals. We at Genialis are deeply committed to this vision as well. To bring it to life, we've recently entered into several new data partnerships with collaborators from around the world to assemble the world's most ethnographically diverse cancer datasets. This initiative has helped support us in the validation of Genialis KRAS ID, the first-in-class biomarker that predicts the response and benefit of KRAS inhibition at any stage of the drug development lifecycle. From May 31 to June 4, we warmly invite you to join us at the 2024 ASCO annual meeting in Chicago. If you'd like to meet with our business and scientific leadership and learn more about Genialis KRAS ID, please email us at biomarkers@genialis.com. We're also looking forward to meeting you at the BIO International Convention in San Diego, and a week later at the Festival of Genomics and Biodata in Boston. To see all of our upcoming events, please click the link in the show notes. Let's jump in a little deeper into the sort of pre-competitive bit. One example, I believe of this would be CancerX program. Can you talk about that specifically, and sort of how you think about messaging to for-profit companies that there's a sort of higher calling and maybe some way they can contribute to a rising tide that's going to lift all ships if they come together in an organization like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we are very proud to co-host CancerX alongside our colleagues at Moffitt Cancer Center, and in partnership with our colleagues at the federal government, and in particular the White House, ONC, and OASH. In the CancerX community, we have over 160 different member organizations. So certainly that is a shining example of pre-competitive collaboration. And the goal of CancerX is, and in particular, is a public-private partnership that sits under the White House Cancer Moonshot. Our goal is to harness the power of innovation to help achieve those goals of the Cancer Moonshot. So a reduction in deaths by cancer or from cancer by 50%, and also sort of addressing the inequity of cancer burden across not just the US. They've actually expanded that to a global remit now. So that's the mission that these 160 organizations and our government colleagues sort of stand shoulder to shoulder in when we think about our North Star. And you asked the very, I think, direct but important question, like the what's in it for me question. And we know that resources are tight. We know that time is at a premium. And here's what I think Dime's superpower ultimately is. And I think we bring all of this to CancerX. I think at this point, there's no doubt that there's an enormous ROI that can be captured from the digitization of healthcare. We can define that R in terms of commercial value to an innovator. We can define it in terms of cost savings to a healthcare provider or a health system, perhaps even new revenue streams. We can define that sort of return as improved health outcomes, improved equity, so on and so forth. These are the sorts of things that we are confident, I think, collectively as a field, that we can capture through the successful digitization of healthcare. But the problem that we have today is achieving that ROI is out of reach for almost every individual company when they tackle it as an individual company. That activation energy to achieve that ROI from today's sort of current state is so high that it actually serves as an impediment, not just to small startups, to large healthcare organizations, to payer organizations, to the federal government. It is challenging to capture this because we haven't decided what good looks like. We haven't aligned the incentives. We haven't actually correctly articulated the opportunities that even exist so that we are driving in the same direction. And so what we think about at Dime and what we've translated into our work at CancerX is, we are here to do great things. We are a mission-driven organization. We are here to improve lives, but we are actually here to make it easier for you to capture the ROI that you need in this, sort of industry in order to survive. And I think recognizing that our partners need to see that and not apologizing for it. And in fact, embracing that, because when they can be successful, patients' lives get better. That's been our secret sauce. We demonstrate that across our portfolio at Dime, and we bring that to our partnership with CancerX.
That's fantastic. And do you see the CancerX work, is it also aligned with sort of these initiatives around more inclusive clinical work and so forth? Because a lot of pre-competitive stuff in pharma anyway is really early in preclinical stuff where maybe, I don't want to say the stakes aren't as high, but it's not such a rat race to be the first to market, et cetera. But are you able to get engagement around clinical goals from these organizations in CancerX?
We absolutely are. And I'd like to kick it to Yashoda afterwards to talk about some very tangible examples from the DE&I and digitized clinical trials work. But let's talk about CancerX first. So my background, I'm actually at the Vibe conference right now as we're recording, and we were here celebrating the 1-year anniversary of CancerX. And as we were reflecting on what we sort of achieved during this time, the first thing is our first area of focus was on using sort of digital innovation to improve equity and reduce financial toxicity in cancer care and research. And so what we were able to put out, what we've already released open access, is a suite of resources that are actively sort of making it easier for healthcare systems and researchers who are already investing in a digital strategy to leverage that investment to simultaneously drive a double bottom line of improved equity and reduced financial toxicity. And there has been tremendous uptake. In fact, we are continuing to work on that with the development of toolkits and actually some ROI models that we will be publishing in just a few months. So that was the first project in CancerX. Also, while we were here, we've just announced the first cohort of startups participating in our CancerX accelerator. Now, you might say to yourself, the last thing the world needs is another accelerator, but this is the first accelerator that's really designed to allow innovators to be successful in the complex arena of oncology care and research. So there will be specific pilot opportunities, coaching opportunities, implementation and mentoring opportunities that relate specifically to cancer. And what I love about this cohort, 75% of the cohort are first-time founders, 63% of the founders are women, 75% of the founders are BIPOC. I could not be more proud of how we are walking the walk in CancerX. And again, this is something that is true across sort of our entire pipeline of work at Dime. Yashoda, do you want to talk about some of the DE&I stuff? Because I just think the way that you are able to inspire and drive change in the field, especially as FDA was sort of pushing on some new guidance, was really extraordinary.
Yeah. And so, what Jen is touching on in here is really the holistic approach. So it's not just at one point in time that we need to be more cognizant of the different populations or the different individuals that need to be included adequately. It needs to be at every step. And so with the DEI and clinical trials project, we created resources that address every step in the clinical trial process, from engagement of patients and recruitment, all the way through to data collection and data analysis, and then in outcomes reporting. And the idea is that it has to be a holistic approach, right? Going back to the multi-stakeholder engagement, we need to have representation at every level in order to have real transformational change. And so with the DEI project, we created resources that help with using digital technologies, digital tools, to identify more patients to be recruited in different clinical trials and to be able to better engage those patients or participants, creating different ways of reaching the participants and then continuing to support them throughout the process. And then we also created resources for the clinical team. I think we take for granted that because they are the clinical team, they automatically are aware of all the different types of digital tools and know how to use it. And we tend to maybe only focus on patients, but we know that the clinical team needs support as well. And so we have resources in there to help with training the clinical team, helping to support them as well throughout the process. And so as similar to with the Cancer X project, the idea really here is to show and support the use of digital tools at every step of the process so that we can really make some transformational changes and we're not coming back and continuously just addressing one point in the process. And the resources we created were modeled after FDA's diversity plan so that clinical trial sponsors can come in and use these resources when they're putting together that diversity plan.
And this is fantastic. I love that you acknowledge you don't want to just get a project done and go like this and say, all right, we've been successful, we can go back to our lives, but you really want to build on the success. And what you've done is create more than a foundation, I think. I mean, the diversity numbers in your accelerator cohort, I think, are extraordinary. You know, it reminds me of a tweet that Y Combinator's founder or leader put out the other day, a couple of weeks ago, of their new crop of founders. And I think there was one woman in the picture of like a huge cocktail party. You know, it's like, come on, guys, try harder, right? But it's a lot of it, I think it's leadership and representation that matters. You know, folks are going to come to you because they see that this is a place where they can have impact.
I agree. Raphael, can I dive into something you just said? Because on the one hand, like I'm sort of nodding along as you sort of say, try harder. I'm also going to say it's not that hard. It's not like we are out there on our hands and knees trying to find talented women and talented, you know, sort of BIPOC founders to welcome to the table. We weren't like, we had exceptional contributions, and it's not like we were sort of tipping the scales to be representative. We took seriously and prioritized in words and action that this was a value that was important to us. We created a diverse community that represented the best innovators from across the board and the broader Cancer X membership. I'm sure that every founder who applied actually looked at that sort of Cancer X community and said, gosh, I see someone who looks like me. I see a group of people who hold my values. We didn't have to try that hard. We just had to make a decision that this is who we are and behave accordingly. It wasn't like we were bending over backwards. And I think that this is like a notion that I want to sort of debunk here, that it is actually terribly burdensome and terribly difficult. It's really not. There are all of these resources. You make a decision, you decide what your priorities are, and you action them.
That's hugely helpful. And I think that my guess is that room full of men building a program are going to look at DE&I and say, well, we don't have the resources or the time or the interest to try that hard, to invest in that. But that's not what it's about, right? It's about priorities and values and wearing those on your sleeve.
100%.
I want to shift a little bit just because there are a lot of topics to cover. And, you know, you had mentioned at the outset, Jen, that DIME doesn't exist to, I think the phrase used was shoehorn technologies into a particular sphere, but it's much more structural than that. But at the same time, I do want to talk a bit about technology because this is a lot of what we're discussing in terms of improving access and dealing with inequities involves adopting technologies that can help address that. Right now, a major part of the kind of healthcare zeitgeist, or at least the conversation, has become around artificial intelligence. And, you know, this is a topic near and dear to me and something we come back to on this show. You know, a year and a half ago, we were making as much noise as we could to try to get people to take the future of AI in healthcare seriously. And now I feel like we're having to have conversations where people are overly concerned or worried that it's eating up the world. And so the truth always lies somewhere in between, but I'd like to understand how DIME is thinking about emergent technologies like artificial intelligence, but let's be specific and talk about AI, where you see that having a big impact, where you see that running real risks? And kind of what sorts of initiatives can you take to kind of help make sure that AI actually works to serve your purpose instead of exacerbate some of the challenges?
So I think one of the most important things is we can't actually assess the impact of AI on things like health equity unless we have the right measures and markers in order to do so. And actually, Yashoda and I sort of published vectors of inclusion that contemplate both DE&I and sort of digital access that I'd love Yashoda to speak to, because I think that that's powerful. When I think about our strategy at Dime, there are brilliant organizations that are out there that are really thinking exclusively about the evaluation of AI models and making sure that the model themselves is actually trustworthy. That is critically important. It needs to be an absolute priority. And I think that the organizations that are working on that are multidisciplinary, they are well-intended, and I think they are going to be very successful indeed. And I am delighted that that is the case. And one of the things that we realize is that there's considerations upstream of that, and there are considerations downstream of that that need to be addressed in order for us to think about leveraging the promise of not just digital, but AI tools or AI sort of models in particular to improve the way that we care for people. First of all, we actually need to think about what are the right problems to solve for and what's the right positioning. And you sort of hinted at this a little bit in your question. How do we make sure that this doesn't sort of exacerbate sort of existing disparities? And on the one hand, that's exactly the right question. And that's what we should be doing through thinking about evaluating these models, making sure they don't have inherent bias, making sure that they translate into different settings. Usually they don't. So we then need to figure out how to actually translate these things. And I saw you smiling there. But, you know, what we think about is, are we actually using these? Are we asking the right question? Because I think what we could do is sort of agonize all day. Oh, gosh, do we want to use some kind of AI-enabled clinical decision support tool? Oh, gosh, what about the risk of bias? This, that, and the other. But the way that Yashoda and I might think about it is through no fault of a busy clinician, right? A clinician in a sort of community-based practice comes in, they have a sort of chronic complex patient, English is the first language, and maybe they have something like a cancer diagnosis. The first line therapy might be a regimen that's actually quite complicated. It needs additional supporting medications, so on and so forth. There is a reasonable amount of data that in some cases that clinician, not because they are behaving badly in any way, but because they are being passionate, might skip over that first sort of treatment option because there's an assumption that it's too complicated. We can actually use things like AI-enabled sort of clinical decision support to prompt them to say, actually slow down. We can make sure like we can help, we can use sort of digital navigation tools to connect the patient with the additional pieces. We can help do translation in order to communicate clearly what this regimen looks like and to actually engage the patient in their decision. We can actually use it to be more inclusive as opposed to sit around and wonder if we can make a pretty inequitable sort of system even worse. So I think there are questions upstream. We obviously need to get better with data collection. That's a much bigger conversation than we have time for today and probably warrants its own podcast. And then we also need to think about the downstream uses, which we can have models that are sort of well validated, that we believe will work in a particular setting, but working are not the same, right? Do we actually have sufficient resources and expertise in a rural healthcare system, in a freestanding clinic to actually be able to implement any of these models, right? Most of these places aren't on the cloud. Most of them don't have a single cybersecurity expert. They're running tiny budgets for their entire tech stack, let alone before we bring in the expense of AI. Those are the sorts of implementation challenges that we are dedicated to thinking about over the coming years at Dime, because they're a little bit less sexy than perhaps some of the other elements, but we believe strongly they are just as important to making sure that we are successful.
Yeah. And just to add on to Jen's comments, we created the Dimensions of Diversity lexicon specifically to help with knowing where we need to focus when we're thinking about health equity, when we're thinking about ensuring that no one's left behind. We created this lexicon with our colleagues at FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And the idea is that we people are multidimensional. And this is part of the wonderful potential with precision medicine, is acknowledging the multidimensionality of individuals and populations. With the lexicon, we are highlighting that everyone across the spectrum, from digital health developers to the implementers, so the clinical team, need to focus on these dimensions We have heard a lot about AI with gaps and biases with racial and ethnic minorities, but then there's also socioeconomic status, there's educational attainment, there's gender identity, there is digital literacy or digital access, as well as cultural parameters or even language. And all of these factors have affected how people experience the healthcare system and the type and level of care that they receive. And so in order for AI to be powerful, we need to also look at all of these parameters when we are looking at the data that's being ingested into AI models that then giving outputs and recommendations to clinicians. And going back to your earlier comment that it's not that difficult, and this is exactly an example of how it's not that difficult. Here are the parameters that you need to think about at every step of the process. Just take the extra time, and in many cases, the data already exists in the EHR or in the clinical records, and just remember to factor those in as you're thinking about the product you're developing, or as you're thinking about who needs to use this product, or how do I get my patient to use the product and really benefit from it. And so with the dimensions of diversity lexicon, we're really trying to put one piece of the foundation there that anyone can then come and build on. And this is how we move the system forward.
No, I think that's hugely helpful, and it's great timing also. One of the big events in the space of AI in healthcare AI period this year was the Biden administration's executive order, which put a lot of balls in motion in a lot of different cabinet departments to put in place things like standards and recommendations. And so, for example, you could see a home for this in a lot of different places where they're going to have an impact on what are the kinds of data that we now require to be collected. Certainly Health and Human Services, National Institute of Standards and Technology would do well to read this lexicon and think where it fits in their initiatives.
I want to add that it's not only what kind of data we need to collect, but how are we collecting it? For example, people still conflate sex and gender. And then if you look at race and ethnicity, that's defined differently across the globe. So really having some clear guidelines on what these terms mean, how we are representing them, and then how we're collecting that data is also going to be important.
Is there anyone in particular? So I just floated a couple ideas of who should be using the lexicon. You said you're putting it out there, but are you targeting it at any particular audiences? Where could it have the biggest immediate impact? With community physicians? So should it be part of sort of continuing education for MDs? Or, is it going to be more top down from, say, like hospital administrators? Or should we have the EHR companies using this to help, sort of shake up the controlled vocabulary in the fields in the EHR? Am I getting close to sort of your vision of how this will be implemented?
My vision is that anyone can take it and start using it right now. And so this is in line with the resources we create at Dime. We make the resources so that anyone can walk in and just take it off the shelf and start using it. And I think that's what needs to happen. We can't wait for a top-down approach. We can't wait for you build it and they will come. Everyone has to be proactive with this. And there's a great appetite for it right now. There's a lot more discussions on health equity. And so now we need to see the action to follow the talk. And so we are sharing this broadly, and we are sharing it with all of our projects so that it gets in front of all the different audiences and everyone can start to use it.
I know we're coming up on time, and Jen, you've got probably a busy day ahead of you at the VIV conference. I'd like to just give you each an opportunity to kind of share some parting thoughts, maybe along the lines of 5 years, 10 years from now. What does success look like? As Jen said, what does good look like? If Dime has the impact that you envision, how are we going to see that change kind of in our lives in the next decade or so?
I would love to see in 5 years that we're not talking about this anymore, that it is just, it's the foundation of every part of the healthcare system, is recognizing that all of these different elements of people are important in healthcare. Precision medicine does this nicely, showing us that it's not only about genetics and genomics, it's lifestyle and environment all play a great part in our health and our care. And so I would like to see that all these resources that Dime is creating becomes foundational and it is top of mind when someone is developing a new digital health product or using it. And then this is how we start to see a change in healthcare. in a few years, in 5 years, we probably will not be saying digital medicine, we'll just be saying medicine. And so hopefully then we can also just be able to say, not have the need to say that we need health equity, because health equity will already have been built in to health and clinical research. And that we're seeing a lot more gains with meeting everyone where they are needed.
Yashoda and I share that goal, which I think is why we have so much fun working together on this, because we really are sort of pushing together in partnership with our community. I think if I had to add something else, I think going beyond sort of defining digital medicine as something different, as opposed to just the fabric of healthcare, what gets me really excited about the promise of digital is that we can move from a sick care system to a healthcare system. The current model is we sit in the clinic waiting for the patient to present already sick, symptomatic at the doors of the clinic before we do anything to help them. At that point, it is at best a patch-up job. I think what's really exciting about our ability to capture enormous amounts of data from outside of the clinic. Yashoda mentioned some of the sort of data that's so important, that's not clinical data, but is incredibly important to people's health. Our ability to analyze that data, our ability to use sort of different communication platforms to reach people. I would like to see us move towards a system where healthcare delivery and clinical research doesn't exist in silos, because we don't need two different data sets anymore, because data can flow in the digital era. And I would like to see a system that is focused on keeping people healthy and out of the clinic, as opposed to how good are we once someone arrives already sick. And I think we can manage digital as different out of the system in the next 5 years, just as Yashoda says. And I deeply believe that we can get to a healthcare system as opposed to a sick care system within 10 years if we keep pushing.
I'm inspired by your conviction and would love to see your predictions, your hopes come true. I personally appreciate the work you guys are doing tremendously. I think it's a model for how to actually get stuff done, which is nice in this day and age where there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. We'll put links to the relevant resources on the show notes, but I just want to tell everyone that at the Dyme Society's website, there are some amazing pages, including their project portfolio, which talks about completed projects, which is a list that's longer than my CV, and active projects and upcoming projects. One last word, Jen, if folks want to get involved, participate, how can they learn more about Dyme, how they can reach out? What's the best way to get a hold of you too? And then I'll say thank you for your time today.
Of course. So our tech team is excellent. So there are buttons all over the website to learn more, join in, sign up to the newsletter. But most importantly, I think get involved. There's an extraordinary community. So we have a SAC community. If you're particularly interested in one of our sort of sub areas of focus like Cancer X, you can get more information about joining that community. And certainly, just as you said, we have a number of really exciting upcoming projects. So for people who want to pull up their chair at the table and say, yes, I want to be part of building this future, there are many opportunities to do that. And we are successful because people who are as passionate as we are about changing the field and have deep expertise in a particular domain of the digitization of healthcare trust us to sort of be the home for solutions. So we really do welcome anyone who shares our sort of passion and mission, and hopefully it's not too hard poking around on our website to find out how to do that.
No, it's actually been a joy poking around on the website. Again, thank you so much for the conversation today. This is really illuminating. I think we've got so much more we could talk about. Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode and find out how some of these initiatives are going down the road. But I really do appreciate the time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
This has been another episode of the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. Hopefully by now you've subscribed to the show, but if not, go ahead and click that subscribe button and leave us a review. And please do pay us a visit at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com to learn more about how AI is transforming precision medicine. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.